Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. Here's a game you made happen. It goes by the name of Necro. Well, some of you certainly did anyway. It was a game that we kickstarted as part of the pilot Kickstarter show, which never continued. And it was gonna fail until we kind of came along and said, hey, this game looks really, really great. Let's make sure it doesn't. And now we actually get to play it. This is a version from PAX. This is, of course, very much an incomplete product. Not finished yet, but I'd like to show you what it's all about. So Necro is a game about necromantic activities. You are most assuredly the bad guy in this title. As you can see here, I'm playing a very, very basic Necro. There are a variety of different variants of said Necro, and I am currently outfitting him with a couple of different abilities and creatures. Now, each of these creatures has 3 different possible variants that you can summon, and then when you get into the fighting, which you can see here is done by an isometric third-person perspective, you will be able to summon them and utilize them to battle your enemies, which are in fact, as you might imagine, innocent townsfolk and so on and so forth. So when you start off, you don't have any blood power in Necro, and blood is what powers everything you can do. So in this case, I am harvesting blood from creatures on the ground. I can even harvest blood from these pigs right here. There's obviously been a lot of animation work being put into those pigs. There's no real doubt about that one. We're going to slaughter the pigs and gain some blood from them, which gives me enough blood to summon a creature, which, as you can see on the hotbar, is number 2 there. Now, this may remind you a little bit of Sacrifice, one of my favorite games of all time. One of those games that blatantly got ignored, which was highly unfair, done by Shiny in their golden days. And yeah, it should kind of remind you of that, because the control of the creatures and the summoning and things like that is Sacrifice-esque. You can see I've summoned 2 creatures here, and now I'm going to be able to command them to attack via a simple sort of RTS-style interface, while I'm still controlling my character here. There's a couple of games that have done that. Battlezone is another good example of that. To some degree, Giant Citizen Kabuto. But in this case, it's very much kind of a mixture of isometric Diablo-style stuff and a little bit of RTS thrown in for good measure. Now, at these basic levels, I don't really have access to a lot of spells. So I can summon this creature on button 1, which, as it stands, actually isn't going to cost me anything. I can use it as a direct attack, which is quite nice because I took an ability which allowed that to happen. Or alternatively, I could summon these horrors, the nasty little flying monstrous killer bats that are currently trying to murder the townsfolk around here. Doing a pretty damn good job of it, as you can see. Now, my Necro can fight, not very well. You can unlock different variants of Necro as well as equipment, which makes him stronger, but by default, your Necro isn't particularly strong. He's got a basic attack and a charged attack, and that's about it. You rely, for the most part, on your creatures. But depending on which kind of Necro you pick, depends on how you will do that. There are Necros which are more proficient in melee combat. There are Necros which are based around supporting the creatures that you currently have. So, you do have a couple of choices there. And of course, the equipment that you pick is going to very much affect the way that you fight, as well as the stats upgrades that you can get between levels. Alright, well that was the first level. Very, very simple there. No real problem. So we're going to go back through the gate here, and we'll be able to unlock some more stuff, and I'll show you something a little bit more advanced. You will see here that I'm getting so-called bonus sins. These sins are used to unlock more stuff as we go through. Now, this mission, I can actually pick a different variant. That is the Alchemist variant, and that changes my basic attack. I'm also going to grab a trinket, which will give me a couple of different abilities, and I've got a lot more available summons here as well. So I could grab these remaining creatures, the Punge right there, and grab that. There's also a Meat Mouth, which is technically not a creature, it's more of a spell. So let's grab him and see what we can do. So, the Punge. What can he do? Well, I can unlock a Stinky Cloud, a Vomit Attack, or a Health Increase for the Punge. Each of those changes the nature of it. I picked Spawn in Pairs for my horror, as well as a Free Scourge. Basically, this is the value build, right? You get the most out of the blood that you spend. Admittedly, the creatures are not perhaps as powerful as they otherwise could be. We'll drop a couple of points in health, because my guy was a little bit weak, and we can increase our starting blood. And with the Alchemist, we now have a ranged attack that can also serve as an AoE heal for your creatures. So it'll do a little bit of damage around the area. You don't hit all that hard with this guy, but you do have that ranged attack, so you're able to kite, and you're also able to support using it. Now, in the loadout screen, I didn't equip my creature's abilities. That was an accident, so the horrors will not be spawning in pairs. Now, those abilities are very, very powerful, so this is going to be a bit problematic for me. But as you can see here, I'm able to use my area of effect heal, as well as toss potions at the enemy to do damage. Now, if I had a complaint about the current Necro system, it's that the actual Necro combat is very repetitive right now, in the sense that you only have a couple of basic attacks, and they don't do a huge amount of damage, which means that you're going to be relying on your creatures, which is fine once you have a large army of creatures, but if you ever lose them, then the combat becomes very frustrating. It becomes a kind of a silly kite fest, and more to the point, early on in the game, when you need to gather blood, it can be a little bit difficult as well. That is probably the biggest concern that I've got for Necro in its current state, and I think it's something that they definitely need to resolve prior to launch, just making that combat with the Necro a little bit more dynamic. Obviously, it'll get more interesting the further on in the game you get, because you get more spells, get more equipment and things like that, but early on, let's say, a little bit repetitive, unfortunately. As you can see here, I'm kiting around here. Now, if I had something like a Punch available, I'd be able to use that as a tank creature, so I would be able to get a lot of that pressure off me. The horrors don't really do that an awful lot. Now, what's going on in the bottom right corner, you might ask? Well, as it turns out, each level actually has an event system, and this event system is based on time, which means that during the level itself, stuff is going to happen. Now, the first event to be tossed at me was a wave of reinforcements, so I know there's going to be more dudes on the battlefield, got to be a little bit more careful with that, and there's a bunch of other stuff as well. Like, there's an event which makes things a lot darker and reduces your visibility. But some of these events you can actually take advantage of, because perhaps they also reduce the visibility of the villagers. So if I wanted to, say, attack a village at night when it's darker and they have less visibility, I could maybe use that to my advantage, and I want to time those attacks to make that happen. So, the events are kind of a double-edged sword. They can be very bad, but you can potentially exploit them to be useful. I like that system because it allows you to play at a particular tempo, and it encourages you to do so. You don't have to, but if you get objectives done in a particularly rapid fashion, you may be able to take advantage of an event later on. So it does encourage you to be efficient early game and not just hang around. If you're too slow, then events can happen, and there could be a build-up of creatures which will be very difficult for you to fight off. So I certainly think you can see the nature of the game here. Objective-based missions, third-person isometric combat, which involves summoning and, of course, very much being the bad guy. What I've got to point out, and I think that you've probably noticed this already, is just how awesome this game actually looks. It has a phenomenal art style. Really, really good. And actually, very high-fidelity effects. It looks phenomenal for an indie title that is developed only by a few people and was done with $100,000 of Kickstarter funding. I'm fighting Mayor Biscuit, by the way. They actually decided to put me in the game. He does drop an item that you can have if you can kill him, but Mayor Biscuit is pretty tough. And Mayor Biscuit is murdering me horribly, because as it turns out, I do not have enough creatures, so I was killed and sent back to the portal with a certain amount of blood to attempt that one once again. It's so surprising how cool this game ended up turning out, especially considering they didn't ask for that much in Kickstarter funding. They'd kind of got it underway by the time they got funded, but the Kickstarter really did manage to push them past that point where they were able to develop this properly. I did an interview with the guys last year at E3, now I got to play it at PAX, and I'm really impressed with how it's turned out. I really am. Certainly, I think the Necro combat does need to be made more interesting. Now, this is not all that fun to do. The whole kiting around and just throwing potions and things like that. But it may just be because the Alchemist variant of the Necro is not really all that combat-orientated. Couple more moves, couple more spells, things like that, I think would make that combat a lot more enjoyable. But once they've got something like that sorted out, I think this is going to be a really nice modern use of the idea which came in maybe about 10 years ago in games for a brief period of time with games like Sacrifice and Battlezone, where you are both fighting and also controlling minions. Very interesting idea. Some have called this kind of a demonic Pikmin, although I would honestly call Overlord that. I would consider this to be more of a mixture of Overlord and Sacrifice, or maybe Sacrifice and something along the lines of Dungeon Keeper to some degree, mostly just in terms of the creature design. I find the creature design very interesting, very Dungeon Keeper-esque. And once again, I get horribly murdered. Shall we skip forward to something a little bit more challenging? I think we can do that. So we're going to unlock as many powers as are currently in this early build, and we're going to go throw a bunch of nasty creatures at some rather large waves of enemies. So let's do that, shall we? I'm going to take a bag of fleas here, which is very, very useful. Once this unlocks, it takes a little bit of time to prepare. I'm going to be able to summon a large bag of giant fleas to defend me. Let's unlock as many summons as we can here. You'll notice that there are a bunch of different creatures. Very interesting designs once again. Some of these are more like spells, yeah? They're not like creatures that hang around for a while. It's just they decided, you know what we want to do? We want to make every spell a summon of some description because that's more interesting thematically. So stuff like the Meat Mouth is not a creature that just hangs around. It is a spell that swallows up an enemy. And in the case of one of the creatures that I grabbed earlier there, the Shade, that is going to be something that slows down time in an area. So it's a fairly powerful spell. And of course, we're going to be able to upgrade it. A Violent Rift means that that's now going to actually do damage. Or we could have a longer rift, depending on what kind of style we want to do. So you can customize your loadout depending on how you want your creatures to synergize. Alright, let's upgrade our health a little bit because we took a lot of damage last time, and that's pretty much burned us out of sin. So let's get into this mission here, and we'll see exactly how it goes. Now, the game is also supposed to feature a crafting system of some description. That was not on display with this particular build, as you might imagine. Though, if you said, hey, it's got a crafting system 5 or 10 years ago, I would have been really excited. These days, it's like, oh, it's got a crafting system? That probably means I'm going to have to grind for materials. I'm hoping that that certainly doesn't happen here. We start off with a 10 blood in this particular level. And this one's not exactly designed to be unbeatable, but it's designed to be pretty difficult to play. Alright, so what we're going to do? Well, at this point, we will unleash a couple of powers here. And you'll notice I also summoned a Punch here to start fighting, which was immediately eliminated. As I said, don't want to mess around on this particular level. Absolutely not. I'm loving almost everything about it right now, including the soundtrack, by the way, which is by Sean Beeson, who you know that I promoted a while ago. I have used some of his music. In fact, a small snippet of his music is actually part of our intro. That's a track by him. He's a really cool guy, and he's a composer for media, and he does a lot of game-related stuff. And frankly, I think he's very talented, and he's put his own work into Necro, which sounds very, very good indeed as well. What can I say? I really like the way that it's looking right now. I'm so happy that it's turning out to be a legit game that sticks to the ideas that the Kickstarter actually put out there in the first place. That they haven't made huge sweeping changes. They haven't backed away from their vision with it. This is exactly what they promised. And that's fantastic. Isn't that great? Isn't it cool what Kickstarter can actually do? And I personally am just so happy that games like this can exist as a direct result of Kickstarter. I am having my face eaten off by wolves, but hey, such is the way of things, right? My bag of fleas is not off cooldown either now, so... I'm looking forward to seeing how this turns out. I'm also looking forward to potential multiplayer combat in this. I think that Sacrifice had a really great idea when it came to multiplayer combat. And again, a game that wasn't really all that much appreciated. So for me, having a Sacrifice-like game, well, that is a very cool thing indeed. They have promised multiplayer, as well as potential co-op options to come in a patch after the game releases. I don't believe they had the funding to fully develop that, so it's most likely going to be a case of, hey, this goes on sale, they make some money, and then they use it to fund further development of the title to make it more interesting and add more features to it. I'm just looking forward to going through a campaign like this. The development of your Necro and the amount of choices and loadout things that you can actually do with your creatures is great. The fact that each creature could really have 3 separate roles depending on the abilities that you give them is a great idea. The question, I suppose, is will I be able to balance them properly? Because in this build, I found that I don't really have a reason to use anything other than free Scourge. Because otherwise, Scourge costs blood. And Scourge is that spell that I use on number 1. You saw those kind of dark trails that head towards the enemy. That's a Scourge right there. I took the ability which allows me to cast it for free. I don't see why I'd take any other ability. But I think the approach there, as I summon my bag of fleas, which, as you will see, are absolutely adorable. Look at them. Look at them. Wonderful. Now I have an army of doom surrounding me. They would have to be really powerful. I think the best way to deal with those kind of situations where there's a clear, obvious choice is to buff the others. It's not to nerf that existing powerful choice, it's to make the other choices equally tempting. And if you want to look at that, then I think you should look towards the way that StarCraft 2 did it with its evolutions in Heart of the Swarm. Blizzard did a great job of presenting you with two equally valid choices. Now, some will disagree with me and say, yeah, there was clearly a choice that was preferable there, but you could play with both and it would give you a profoundly different experience. That's, I think, what they have to do here. They've got to make sure that those choices are meaningful. They've also got to make sure that those choices are balanced to the point where you could pick pretty much any of them and they would be absolutely viable in their own ways without making you say, you know, I really should have picked the other one because it was clearly more powerful. Yeah? Make people choose the other ones out of curiosity, not out of, oh, my choice was the wrong one, it was weak, so I'm gonna have to grab the one that's OP right now. It can be difficult, certainly, but I think take the other abilities for Scourge, make them just as powerful as Free Scourge, and then you're gonna have a willingness for people to actually spend that blood on that spell there. Yeah, Necro is awesome. It really is. I love it. I really do, and I'm looking forward to seeing it come out. It's great to see a Kickstarter project be so successful. It's great to see such a high-fidelity game with such a unique art style and a great set of design decisions behind it. There are things that definitely need to be improved, and I'm hoping they're able to do that prior to release. Ladies and gentlemen, my name has been TotalBiscuit, giving you an early look here at Necro. I'll see you next time.